Well, now we get to the true entree portion of the dinner, the real beef. What a treat it is for me to be here with Governor Brown. I can't think of anyone better to kick off this dinner. And Governor, I want to begin just with a broad question because I've tracked you on this issue for so long. The climate issue clearly is something that you speak about with a extra passion, something you've cared about for a long time. Why?
Well, you know, why, that's always a good question, but I think one significant reason is that the environment, starting with the environment that became very salient in the early 70s, is something that attracted me right away. And then the environment issues then fed right into the climate change questions. And why? I would say that coming out of a Jesuit seminary in the early 60s, life seemed rather ephemeral and episodic and random. And so what were what could take the place of the fundamental theological premises that were the guiding force in my life in the 50s and after I left that life? And when you deal with the laws of nature, the atmosphere above, this thin atmosphere on which we depend, the thin layer of soil below on which all our food is produced, that to me is fundamental. And fundamental issues interest me very much, and I think there is an analog. It isn't theology, but it has the same absolute quality that you can't go against it. It's unforgiving. So you have to take it seriously. A lot of modern existence is optional. Climate change is not optional. It's mandatory. Global chemistry is what it is. If you affect it, you get exactly what the chemical reaction is. So my interest is this is something that counts. And being in the world that I'm in, the business I'm in, there's a lot of things that don't count. There's a lot of things that are extremely superficial, trivial, you know, of today and not tomorrow. So, but the environment and climate change is not going away. It is deeply, we are embedded in it. I like to say that economics is inside of ecology. Ecology is inside of economics. The ecological principles on which all living things depend, that's the basis. And we have to get on the side of ecology, not try to get ecology on the side of our economics. So that's why, that's the pathway that got me into it.
Your answer, you know, Governor, reminds me of something my friend Rob Watson, who was really the prime mover on green buildings, used to say, which is that Mother Nature, she's just chemistry, biology, and physics. That's all she is. You can't talk her up, you can't talk her down, you can't say, Mother Nature, we're in the middle of the Trump administration. Could you take a few years off? She's going to do whatever chemistry, biology, and physics dictate, and she always bats last, and she always bats 1,000.
You know, there's another way to say that. In the New Testament, there's a phrase, God is not mocked. And you can say that about the environment. The environment is not mocked. If you try to do that, you lose.
Absolutely. So last year I wrote a column in which I argued that the real opposition party in America today is not the Democratic Party, it's the state of California. And because you actually have real artillery, unlike the Democrats right now, you have market power.
2.7 trillion.
Yeah, exactly. That's real. That's not chopped liver. That's
Our
real.
Our budget is going to be something like 180 billion.
That is, and I see it coming into play more and more. So my question, Governor, is to what extent have you been able to, and to what extent do you think you'll, because we got at least 3 more years of an administration that is really bound and determined to unravel our climate policy.
Yes.
So to what extent have you been able to, and do you think you will be able to, use the market power of the state of California, the regulatory and market shaping power of California, to resist some of these things coming out of the EPA right now and Washington in general?
Well, first of all, resisting EPA is something we've done over a number of years, and before I was governor under Schwarzenegger, there was resistance.
Yeah.
We are a rule-bound society, and rules of the Environmental Protection Agency are articulated through a regulatory process.
Mm-hmm.
The regulatory process is based on evidence. It can't be arbitrary decision by some bureaucrat. So the rules were put in with evidence, and they can only be taken out with evidence. And it's a long, torturous process.
Right.
So these rules will, if they're embedded in regulation, they're not coming out in 3 years. There will be a process, and the courts will. And this, when you say the courts, you're talking about the district court, Court of Appeals, Supreme Court. So that right there is well more than 3 years. Secondly, we do have some autonomy in the state. Our building standards, our land use policies. We do have a waiver under the Federal Clean Air Act where we can have stricter laws, and we do with zero emission vehicle mandates, with tighter emission standards for vehicles. Now that can be changed.
And you have other states who are paralleling those as
And
well. Yeah.
any other state can follow
Yeah.
California.
Yes.
This all goes back to the good old days of 1969 when Ronald Reagan was governor and Richard Nixon was president. And that's when the Clean Air happened. And when it happened, there was embedded in the Clean Air Act was a special provision that said California can have their own rules on vehicle emissions. And we do that. But we have to get permission.
Good.
So, but more than that, we're our renewable requirements, we call it a renewable portfolio standard. Right now, we're at just about 30% aggregate, not counting nuclear, of which we have a couple of thousand megawatts, and not counting hydroelectric, which we have maybe 15,000 megawatts. So we're already at almost 50% renewable electricity right now in California. We will continue doing that. We'll be 50% by the more restricted measures of renewable energy. That's basically solar, geothermal, and wind, and some biofuel. We'll be 50% probably in 2025. And 100% in 2040 is not out of the question at all. It'll depend on storage, depends on a regional grid, but California is actively pursuing an energy policy that we can sustain in the face of federal opposition. We will do the Obama Clean Air Act and more. We will be able to do that. Now, if the federal government...
mileage, auto mileage too, you'll be able to do that.
Well, the auto mileage standards are more problematic. They're now the national standards. But we have an ACE card called China. China is requiring 7% or more of EVs in order to sell cars. They're going to keep upping that.
Yeah.
And so as China does that, so will California. California is the biggest auto market. We have half the electric vehicles in America, and China is the biggest market. So these are two formidable domains that even Mr. Trump can't overcome.
What excites you right now as you look at the green technologies that have emerged from California, whether it's zero carbon buildings, electric vehicles? What are the technologies you've seen that really excite you? And to what extent has California's steadily rising standards actually driven innovation?
Oh, that's a good question. When you say what excites you, I don't know if automobile standards really excite me.
These people, oh my God, they go crazy for auto standards.
I'd say my wife excites.
No, we know that.
Will you give me that question again?
So when you look out at the state and you see the incredible green technologies as an industry that have emerged in California, and a lot of them have emerged in part because this state has had steadily rising efficiency, mileage, emission standards. Which of the technologies have you seen during your time as governor that really?
Well, I can tell.
Yeah.
Well, one right off the bat is storage. Electrical storage, which barely existed a few years ago. California put in a requirement that the private investor-owned utilities must purchase, in aggregate, 1,300 megawatts of electrical storage. And they're halfway there. This was just done a couple of years ago. When I was Attorney General, the electric company said they could not do that. Well, today they are doing it, and we are driving that technology right here in California, and that's crucial to make renewable energy as an intermittent source viable. So that source is very important. And the other technologies, like one of the reasons why California has almost 30% renewable electricity is because the price was driven down on the panels, basically from China investment. So we didn't do that, but we are taking advantage of it. And so we do have investment. We have the Lawrence Livermore Labs, we have Stanford, Berkeley, we have Tesla, we have Google, we have a lot of people investing money. I wouldn't say that's private, and that's important. But we also derive innovation from regulation. Regulation is thought of as bad, but we actually, by setting a standard, you must have so many electric vehicles. You must reduce your NOx emissions so much. You must have 50% renewable energy by a certain date. We are actually driving innovation, not telling them exactly what to do, but just giving the overall performance achievement. And we have the same thing now with our cap and trade. That's not a technology, it's a regulatory process. But we just had an auction last week. We expected that it would bring in 300 million, it brought in 800 million. It's already brought in 6 billion. And that money is plowed back into, well, let me give you an example.
Yeah, talk about how that money is being, from that cap and trade is being reintegrated into communities.
Yeah, the cap says each year you industries must emit less. And if you don't, you've got to buy an allowance. And the allowance then is coming into the state, and the state then has a fund in which it pays. For example, one of the most important areas to reduce emissions is short-lived climate pollutants, methane. Where does methane? Well, dairies. Dairies are a source of methane. Biodigesters can capture that, but they're expensive. So we're investing $50 to $75 million in medium-sized farms to introduce biodigesters. So we are pushing technology at reasonable scales throughout the whole industry. But we're also encouraging the capture of carbon in the cement industry. You can capture carbon and plow it back into aggregate and put it into cement. Very small, just beginning, but wherever we can, our goal starts with greenhouse gas reduction. We want to be 40% below 1990 by 2030. We are reducing each year, and so whatever way we can do that, we put a regulation into effect to achieve that goal. So
which is literally the opposite of what's going on in Washington. There, the argument is somehow if you dispense with regulation, you'll actually be encouraging investment. When in fact, when you lower air conditioner standards rather than raise them, you just invite more cheap foreign air conditioner exporters to come into our market. When you raise the standards, you play to our strength, which is California's strength, which is technology.
Exactly, and even now some of the automobile companies are trying to come out and say, gee, the standards in a few years will be too tough.
Right.
Will you let us off the hook? The trouble is, all over the world, there are companies, particularly in China, that are pushing toward a lower standard. And if Detroit succeeds in weakening our standards or American standards, they might quite possibly be pushed out by more competitive and cleaner vehicles from China or Europe or some other place. So I do think intelligent regulation. I can remember in 1975, Henry Ford II came out and said, your NOx standards, we can't live with them. And those NOx standards then were many times more lenient than they are today. But we said, well, Henry, you got to live with it. And he did, and we've gone way beyond that. I mean, if the standard was, 3 parts per million, and now it's 0.03 parts per million. So technology has really driven the technology, the
advances there,
the investments far more than we could ever imagine.
I think there are 14 states aligned with you?
I think so, maybe 12.
Well,
Okay, 14,
whatever.
But 12 are aligned with our zero emission vehicle mandate.
Okay. But none of them are red states. Is there a chance that, what's the difficulty? Is there a chance that you see this coalition expanding, at least out west, into into Republican-led states?
Well, in the cap and trade debate in California, 8 Republicans came and said they want to be a part of it. And they said they want to be a part of it because in their own surveys and analysis, they felt they were losing support. And that's true. The Republican Party, well, at one point it was 56% of the electorate. That was before, that was during Hoover's time. But it has come down, it was 43, 25 years ago, it's now 24%. So it's coming down, and they felt in part there's insensitivity to the environment, something they want to correct. So they said, we want to be part of your cap and trade solution. So in that sense, we got 8 Republicans, very unusual. Now the trouble is the leader, who was a conservative man, went to, I think, Liberty University, his father worked with Billy Graham, they threw him out because the local grassroots absolutely revolted because they say cap and trade is government regulation, it's a tax, it's bad, it's about climate change, which is a liberal plot. So, but we did get 8 people, they're still there, and we need a conversion here. We need some experience. These Republicans have to change or they got to get out of the way. And so I'm hopeful some will change, but I think they need to lose one of the houses or both.
Yes.
And we need a president that at least follows science.
Are there, though, Republican governors who have worked with you or want to work with you without going into a witness protection program? I mean,
Well,
sorry.
yeah, governors in liberal states like Massachusetts and Maryland.
Interesting.
But I talked to one Republican governor. He said, look, I'll talk to you about renewable energy, work with you on that.
Yeah.
But I can't use the word global warming. Can't use it. And and it struck me with my theological background, this is like trying to talk about abortion in the Vatican. It's not a term you want to express, not in front of the Pope anyway. So in front of Republicans, climate change, global warming has been reframed as regulation, liberal, threat to the free enterprise system. So I think there will be some that will follow science because every scientific academy in the world has accepted and written about the human impact on climate change. So it's there, and it's only the United States, and even the Trump administration's climate report followed the same orthodox science. So I think there's a time lag here. And the Republicans are operating, they wanted to take away health care from people. Now they want to have this humongous tax bill. And I think that tax bill may do to the Republicans what the Obamacare did to the Democrats. That was 1,000 Democrats that went to turn to Republican seats. So it's a big, gigantic plan. But unlike the Affordable Care Act, which is still here, which has helped tens of millions of people, this tax act, in addition to increasing the deficit, does exacerbate the inequality. So I don't think it's going to be, I know they say we got to do something, but sometimes doing nothing is the best policy. And that's very hard for a politician because they always want to know, what are you going to do? And sometimes doing nothing is very smart.
What did you learn on what have you learned in general on this issue from your trips to China?
Well, I learned that the Chinese are facing this terrible pollution, and since reducing carbon emissions is both a health strategy as well as a climate change strategy, they are responding to the people. And I would give this as an earlier example. During the time when the Clean Air Act was passed and Reagan was governor and California got its special waiver provision to have stricter laws on air pollution, Los Angeles had terrible smog. In fact, the term smog was invented by a Caltech scientist. He coined the phrase. And so this was an experience. The bad air pollution in California, that drove California's trajectory to deal with the environment and air pollution. Same thing is happening in China. So I think health, that's the question. Today, 40% of the kids in inner cities are using their inhalers. This is not a good thing. You put that on television, and for example, we did have a test. The Global Solutions Act was put to a ballot, put to a vote by Valero and Tesoro. They paid the money and they put it on the ballot and they lost by 16 points. And one of the images in the campaign were people using their inhalers and the Lung Association. So that's the power, I think, of China's pollution to drive environmental regulation, and that's true in America. So maybe the air is cleaner in these red states. Maybe they don't need to clean up the air. But I think they will at some point.
What was your takeaway from the wildfires last, late summer and fall? Do you feel, is this the new normal for California?
Yeah, I think it is the new, well, we can never say exactly what's going to happen in the future, and there is uncertainty. But when these fires started, the humidity was under 5% in the highest mountain in Napa. And when that humidity gets low, and then you've had years of drought, the soil is dry, the vegetation is dry, the trees are dry. This vegetation all has moisture. When that moisture is not there anymore, it's just kindling. And when the fires get going, they get very hot, and then the winds get up over 100 miles an hour, and man, they go. And the sparks blew right across the 101 freeway. No one ever expected that. So this is the new normal. California is burning up. The fire season is not a couple of months in the summer. It's virtually year-round. It'll be worse in Southern California. And what happens in California, by the way, that's going to increase the greenhouse gases significantly. But other parts of the world are going to face worse things. This humidity and heat, when that gets up to a certain point, 125, 130 degrees, you can't live. And the prediction, current models are predicting that that's going to happen several times a year. So unless you have air conditioning, you will die. So that's a big game changer. Our forest fires are horrible enough, but there are other fire heat horrors that are going to affect people all over the world. And we're not talking 100 years. We're talking 20, 30 years.
This is why we let people eat first, because you and I could ruin any dinner party. I do weddings and bar mitzvahs too. So what are the things, you got a little more than a year left as governor. On this agenda, you got a big summit coming up in September. What are the things that you'd like to accomplish, move down the road before the end of your term?
On the climate change area. Well, I'd like to get more electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles, more zero-emission cars out there, number one. That's important. And that's going to take other people in the world doing that, because we can't just do it alone. Let's just take the forest fires. The forest fires generate millions of tons of CO2. This overcomes all the hard work that we have and all these different building efficiency, renewable energy, clean cars, and all the rest of it. We get enough forest fires, and there's more greenhouse gas, not less. So I want to introduce a more intelligent way to manage forests. I mean, the native peoples who've been here for 20,000 years, they managed the forests, and they had burns, and they knew what to do. We're going to have to find a way to take out a lot of that kindling, a lot of that fuel that is causing us such trouble. So managed forests is a big deal. And I want to push the renewable, we're for 30%. I think we maybe get another 10% in the next year. All the things we're doing, push harder. Now, in terms of this UN climate conference that we're sponsoring here in San Francisco the fall of next year, we're going to have the subnational jurisdictions. Those are states and provinces: Oregon, Washington, Quebec, Baden-Württemberg, all sorts of subnational entities. They're all going to come, and we already have a coalition of 200, actually 205 of subnational jurisdictions as part of our under two degrees coalition. And we're going to bring business, we're going to bring some people, leaders in the civil society, and before they get here, we're going to contact all of them and get them to raise their ambition. What are you doing now? What do you think you can come and tell us that you'll do in the next 5 years? So I want to use that as a catalyst so that after September, then we have the Poland Conference of the Parties 24. Now, Poland's a big coal state. They're not, they're not hankering after solar collectors over there. They like their coal mines. So if that's going to be a successful step leading to 2020 to realize the Paris goals more, we need to get a good push. And I want that fall summit right here in San Francisco to be a way to get people to make commitments, to understand. Now, just to say that, I want to tell you why that's hard. It's very hard to know what your greenhouse gases are. What are the emissions? Now in California, we measure it, we've been doing it, we have a fairly good idea. We got about 440 million tons a year. Do most countries know that? I don't know. Do most states know that? Well, we want to get them aware of where they are, what they're doing, and then what steps can they take as a state, a city, a region. And then we'll build up a whole global movement. Because what we're facing is no doubt an existential threat. You saw that in the movies. There are people who are going to die. There's going to be tens of millions, hundreds of millions of migrants. All the problems you see in Europe will be magnified. All the divisions we have in America will be magnified. It's going to become very difficult to govern, and it's not very easy right now. So this topic of climate change is really important. And so I hope what I can do in the next year is to mobilize as much support to take real action before I go to whatever my next venture is.
Well, bless your heart. That's a great segue, Governor, to we have this incredibly informed audience, and we have roaming mics, and I invite you to join the conversation. So just raise your hand, and one of the folks with the mic will gladly locate you. And please identify yourself.
Hello, my name is Christian, and I'm here from the Global Challenges Foundation. We're based in Stockholm, actually, and we're here for this event. My question is, why do you think climate change has become a partisan issue? I mean, you mentioned Nixon before, he founded the EPA, and that used to be like a very conservative thing to care about the environment, but it's now a partisan issue, and what can you do to change that?
Good question.
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. I'm not sure that I really know the answer. The way it looks is that dealing with climate change takes a very assertive governmental action, a series of actions. You can't just sit around and say, okay, I hope the market will all work it out. You do need policy, you need leadership, you need rules. Your tax code should be a certain way to encourage less pollution and better alternatives. That, to the Republican mind, goes against the doctrine of laissez-faire. Let it all hang out. Let the market rule. The market is either a god or a closet dictator for most of the Republicans. It is the only thing some of them believe in God in their local church. Some of them do. I don't know how many. But the other thing they believe in is that the market, which is an abstraction, it's a concept, it's a construct. And that construct is the most important thing holding the party together, which consists of fundamentalists, entrepreneurs, small business people, taxes and anti-government. That is the party. So they've just evolved into this anti-climate change as part of their anti-government belief system. And breaking that up, that's going to be challenging. It might be easier to remove them from office than it will be to convert them. Conversion is a difficult process.
Right over there.
Hi, my name is Matt Abel. I'm from a group called the Research Triangle Clean Tech Cluster in North Carolina. It's long been known that California is a leader in the renewable energy field here in the United States and across the globe. So my question to you is, what are you doing here in California to make sure that other states and other countries are following your charge, and what lessons are you helping to convey to other folks to continue to see the progress that you've made here across the globe and across the United States?
Well, that's precisely the goal of the Under 2 Coalition. The Under 2 Coalition was started just a couple of years ago with the leader, the governor minister, as they call him, from Baden-Württemberg. That is a province in Germany. And that individual and myself signed an agreement, which we called the Under 2 MOU. And then we started getting people to sign on. Now we have signatories representing well over 1 billion people and well over almost 40% of the world's wealth, GDP. So and now, what is the Under 2 MOU? What is the Under 2 Coalition? It's to keep the temperature under 2 degrees centigrade, or 2 tons per person greenhouse gases in a year. So we have a goal, and now each of the signatories have to display, report on how they're going to meet it. Now that's the framework. Now that's the that's the idea. But then falls the shadow. What's the reality? It's going to be quite challenging. This business of climate change, easy to talk about. We're talking about it up here, but it requires heroic effort, extraordinary imagination, and very strong leadership at every level: city, state, national, international. And because it's global, it's diffuse, nobody's in charge. Nobody's in charge of the climate threat. Everybody has a piece: businesses, governments, localities. So it's a threat we've never, when we have a threat, we could say, oh, well, Russia's a threat, or the ISIS is a threat. That is locatable. Where is the climate threat? It's everywhere. Tonight, when you came here, I came here in a vehicle powered by gasoline. I think Tom did not use biofuels on the airplane that brought him here. So we're all contributing, and we have to make this major break. It's a paradigm shift. I like to analogize. We have to go from the equivalent of pagan Rome to Christian Europe, but not in a period of 400 and 500 years. Yeah. We got to do it in the next 20 years. So it's quite, and I don't think it's being taken seriously, because climate change is really not news. And I like to say, the way I like to frame it is, the end of the world is not news. There's a lot of other stuff, and you just pick up the paper tomorrow and you'll know what news is. But this issue of climate change, and we can talk about nuclear problems too, but I'll leave those off to the side. The big, catastrophic, existential threats are not news. They're not part of the political game inventory of how politicians survive or not. And that is the big challenge. How can we get this topic on the agenda? I think we're getting there. When Obama and Xi got together and helped make Paris happen, it actually started to get on the front page. Before that, it was not, you could barely get anybody to talk about it. So we're making progress. The question is, we're running out of time. It's a real race against time. And it's this slowly moving deterioration, which is the chemistry of our global environment, but it's also going to be the chemistry of our governing systems, which will be as contaminated as the environment when all the problems and disruptions occur because of the climate.
It feels sometimes, Governor, that we're waiting for the perfect storm, which is a storm big enough to end the debate, but not so big as to end the world.
Well, that's
finally,
that's a fine line.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't want to miss. Over there.
Hi, my name is Amber Mahone with Energy Environmental Economics here in San Francisco. And Governor Brown, you mentioned that a regional grid is a critical strategy
Yes.
to increasing the renewables on the grid. And I was wondering what you think the prospects for that are, or what you would do to improve the chances of having a more regional grid.
Well, regional grid is important because right now, with our 30% renewable energy, there are many hours on moderately warm days with bright sun where we're dumping, huge amounts of electricity because we have nowhere to use it. And when we have a bunch of electric cars, we can charge the cars. When we have batteries, we can charge the batteries of the storage. We don't have that. So we need to spread it out. We need to spread it out in the West. So I pushed that this year. It was blocked. And there's a lot of politics involved in that. And I think we'll overcome it. It's too logical. Renewable energy is not going to really make sense at beyond a certain 30, 40% without a regional grid. So I think where there's a few obstacles, which I don't need to bore you with, they're just that kind of vulgar politics of which I am so attracted to. So we will get it done. But there's just a couple of characters, a couple of deals that need to be made, and a little more pressure from, there's just different interests. There's different people. The people who sell solar have one view, the utilities have a view, the people, the unions who install it have a view, some of the purists have a view that, oh, if we have a regional grid with Oklahoma, they're coal people, they'll contaminate us. So we have a few things to overcome, but I'd say we have a good chance to do it. If you don't do it this year, I'm sure it'll come the next year.
Right over here.
Mike Milkey with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. What lessons, if any, do you think can be taken from California's successful run this year in getting bipartisan support, 2/3 support in the legislature for a price on carbon?
What lessons can be taken?
For bipartisan support.
That somehow 8 Republicans were moved. Because the truth is, the Republicans came to me and they said they wanted to do it. And if they had not done that, we wouldn't have got the extension of the cap and trade bill. So politics is not always the strong men saying, you know, we will do it. You need a lot of other factors over which you do not control. Now, I did work with these people, but I think it's a good sign because these are serious Republicans with serious political consultants who came to the conclusion that to prevent the continuing erosion, particularly with younger people, they should be doing something about the environment and specifically climate change. But I would give the full credit to the Republicans and the former leader, who's no longer leader, but he's still in the assembly. He came to me, and that's why it happened. So part of this stuff is luck. You know, as you all read Machiavelli, I'm sure. Some politicians have prints next to their bed. But Machiavelli said 2 things. You need fortuna and you need virtu. Skill and fortune, luck. So that was very lucky, but I think I skillfully took advantage of it.
Yeah. Back there.
Governor, I'm David Gilbert from Years of Living Dangerously. I want to follow up on the carbon pricing question.
David, would you tell the folks here who may not know just a little bit of what the Years of Living Dangerously series is?
Nice of you to ask, Tom. Years of Living Dangerously is a series on climate change, featuring, among other people, Tom Friedman. It's been on Showtime and on the National Geographic Channel, and we're also very active on social media, and we will be doing a 3rd season of Years of Living Dangerously on the National Geographic Channel. So thanks for the plug. Tom has been to, among other places, to Agadez, I believe, in Niger for Years of Living Dangerously to talk about climate migration from Africa, which is one of our best stories. On the issue of carbon pricing, I imagine that most people in this room, if not all, would accept the notion that carbon pricing is a great idea. But I think if you polled the people in the room on whether it is efficacious as a national political strategy, you know, you'd have some people who think that it maybe is the silver bullet or the closest thing we have to a silver bullet on climate, and a lot of other people who feel that it's a political loser nationally, that it's really a waste of time, that Congress will never do it. So going beyond California and the remarkable success you've had here, what advice would you have for those of us who believe that carbon pricing is something that really ought to happen on a national level?
Well, first of all, carbon pricing is not the whole story. We feel the cap and trade program, which is a form of carbon pricing, will be no more than 20% of our carbon reduction goals. So it's important. Maybe it goes as high as 24%, but it's not. There's still 75% of other stuff: renewable energy, efficient buildings, zero-emission cars, soil forest recapture of carbon, lots of things. But the so the yeah.
You've had a very successful, there aren't many places that have pulled off the carbon
Oh, yeah,
pricing mechanism here as you have
Here's
in
the point
California.
of the carbon mechanism. If you put in a cap and you say your emissions are capped and this year, and for now on, every year they're going down by a fixed amount. Now, to make that work, you have two options. You can say, we will have the regulatory authorities put regulations on your industry to make that happen. Or you can say, we will have a carbon market. Now, we already have done that test, and it turns out the oil companies didn't oppose it. The dairymen didn't oppose it. The Chamber of Commerce didn't oppose it. They've supported it. The Farm Bureau supported it. The Poultry Cooperative supported it. The Business Roundtable supported it. And what was the trick? The trick is we got the cap in law before we did the trade. So once you put in the cap, you're either facing the draconian, invasive, regulatory intrusion of government, or you're facing an impersonal market where you can buy and sell allowances while you're bringing down your emissions, and it goes to the most efficient. So it is a market idea. It's very Republican at its essence. And I think if you first start with a cap. Now, how do we get a cap? Well, let me tell you, this is another example of a little strategy here. We had a bill. It wasn't mine. It was one of the Senate leaders.
And talk what you're doing with the money, too, that's earned from it.
Well, the money, what, you want to know what you do with it? That's a good question. People love the money from cap and trade. Now, I don't want to give a gruesome analogy, but you have a lot of food in a trough. You have all these people who are extremely hungry. That's the image of cap and trade. We can do a lot of things. And we've already collected $6 billion. So this is not chump change. This is real stuff. And that also is operating. But what happened is one of the senators proposed that California adopt a rule, reduce oil use by 50%. And that got out of the Senate, it was over the Assembly. Oil companies didn't like that. Big fight. And the moderate Democrats, along with all the Republicans, said no. Well, while they were fighting that, they had another bill that came along that said there shall be a cap, a limit on emissions. That kind of snuck through. Once that happened, which was the year before, then when it came time to do cap and trade, it was business that was really promoting it, and a lot of the more liberal, eco-local groups, they said, no, we want to deal with air pollution, not cap and trade. But as it turned out, we had the 8 Republicans, we got most of the Democrats, we missed a few, so we were able to get a 2/3 vote. But it's a series of steps. It takes some luck. It takes working. You don't do it overnight. You got to build relationships. And I think the market mechanism, this carbon market is a market, and it works. And I think business people, once they see the alternative, which is regulatory intrusion, they'll take the market anytime.
Got time maybe for one more question. Yeah, then we're going to have a little dessert. Oh, sorry. We'll do these two. We'll do you and yeah. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is ONeill. I am an editor at Wirecutter, which is a website owned by the New York Times. We specialize in writing guides about products, things you can buy to make your life easier. And it just so happens I work in a department of the outdoors, where I work with a lot of writers and editors, and we have a lot of readers who are deeply concerned about the environment and climate change to the degree that they're almost paralyzed. They'll write to us unable to buy a new winter coat that we recommend because they're just so scared of consuming and contributing to the problem. What can I tell my readers and our writers and our editors so that they do not despair?
That's a very good question. I think there's a lot of grounds for despair, but don't. There's a lot of grounds for optimism too. I do think what is required is massive, continuous innovation and the investment for that. This is what America needs. This is what Europe needs. We have to mobilize the minds, the resource, the money, the talent, the machinery, the research labs to get on a sustainable path compatible with the climate. We need that. But there's one more thing. It isn't just technology. Technology is creating the problem. Technology got the car, got the coal mine, got the oil production, got the fracking, got the natural gas, got all this stuff going. So technology is the problem. It's also a major part of the solution we need. But there's also a shift in understanding, in values, in how we live. So I think if you're promoting a lifestyle or a consciousness, an awareness that we have to shift in a world with 7.3 billion going to 9 or 10 billion, we can't be just like the American ideal in the 1950s. We have to be leaner, lighter on the planet. We need to be more cooperative. So I think there's a philosophical, a spiritual correlate to this massive technological innovation. So to the extent you can recommend good, sustainable products, that's good. To the extent you can encourage people to think how they live and what's important and how we're going to live in a way that 9 billion other people can live in a quality way, that is a profound, radical shift, and we got to get at that too.
It's not enough just to have green buildings. You have to have an ethic of conservation.
You do.
I mean, otherwise, you get a solar-powered Hummer and drive it through the rainforest, you know,
Or if you get a more efficient car,
Right, yeah,
you can drive further on less fuel.
yeah, there's
So
got to be an
this-
ethic
this-
of conservation that goes with it.
So you need a little bit of a limit, a little self-restraint. And the problem is, I like to say that we got two curves. We got the curve of technological innovation, which is giving the human race more and more power. And that power is also the power of destruction. And that curve is just going straight up. The other curve is the curve of wisdom and self-restraint. And that's completely flat. And unfortunately, the gap is growing. So we need more wisdom and more self-restraint, along with more intelligent innovation.
That's right.
Thank you, Governor Brown. I'm Maggie Alexander with Smart Wires, and there's a huge responsibility with asking the last question, so I'll make it a good one. With the proliferation that we're seeing of initiatives or MOU under 2, these mayoral compacts, these commitments to having a positive impact on climate change, I'd be really interested to hear your perspective on accountability. And we're seeing a lot of big businesses commit to these things and with a lack of kind of federal oversight. What's your perspective on accountability, and is it a carrot or a stick approach that you think is going to be most successful moving forward?
Well, first, carrot, stick, but there's another component to accountability. What are the facts? What's the data? Where are we? What are the greenhouse gas emissions? What are their sources? How do we turn them down? Can we measure? Even in California, we don't have our final report from 2016. And before coming tonight, I was talking to a number of the people who work in these fields in state government. I was saying, come on, guys, where are we on business efficiency? We said we were going to increase by 50% the efficiency of our buildings. Well, what does that mean? Where are we? So that's a form of that's an accountability that we are still trying to create. Now, so measurement, very, very important. Where are we? And my hunch is that most states and most countries don't have a very clear idea. That when you meet a governor or a mayor or a president, a prime minister, you ask him, what were the greenhouse gases emitted by in your jurisdiction last year, and what were the principal sources? And I'm sure that 90% of them couldn't tell you. So that's the first accountability. Know what is going on. The second, now you said between carrots and sticks. Well, carrots are nice, like tax incentives. Sticks are thou shalt do it or else. I think you need both. You need sticks. There's nothing more powerful than coercive intervention. If you have the power to coerce, if they can't stop you, it's very effective. Then you need to have kind of a bright-eyed, wonderful world where people see the positive. So I do think punishment is good and reward is good. It just has to be in the proper balance.
Governor, that's a good setup for my last question, which I want to close with, which is that, so when you come back as governor in 2030,
in 2030, I will be 92 if I'm still here.
like I said, when you come back as governor in 2030, what do you fear California will look like then, and what do you hope it'll look like then?
Well, I think California, it's a multiracial society. It's progressive, but there's certainly a lot of conservative spirit here as well. I think California is going to do reasonably well. I get more concerned about the country and the world. Where are we? Now, in terms of climate change, the forest fires, the extreme weather events, the snow not coming, but rather coming in rain, and then massive movement of water that will overwhelm our delta and our levees. So that's an issue. And then we have this governance problem where we're getting more and more polarized, so that could get worse. And then this whole financial system, which we're all dependent on, and I see the new Federal Reserve man thinks we have too many regulations. So that could be a problem. So I'd say the risks are very high, but I guess the way I'd frame it up, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Let's get it done, keep at it, and don't be discouraged by what you see.
Wonderful finish. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Terrific. Really good job.